Let's go to our Canberra crew, Sky News political contributor Chris Uhlmann and the Australian's national editor Dennis Shanahan. Let's talk about the launches. We'll get into news poll in a moment, but let's stop and talk about these launches yesterday. We had Labor in WA, we had the Coalition in Western Sydney. Dennis, you know, we've all been around a while. I reckon in terms of hoopla, these launches are becoming smaller and smaller events, less probably influential in the campaign, if I can say that. Give us your thoughts on that point, but also the various policy offerings we saw on the table.
Well, look, I think the campaign launches are certainly nowhere near what they used to be. They used to be in large venues with huge crowds, and you could work the crowd and build up emotion and all that sort of thing. But yesterday, out in the Liverpool Catholic Club in Hoxton Park, there were just over 200 people in the audience, and that included a lot of hand-picked Liberals. Well, they're all hand-picked Liberals, but including shadow ministers and former Prime Ministers. So a very small crowd, the smallest crowd I have ever seen at a campaign launch. It had fewer people and more security people than I've ever seen at a launch. So yes, the security point is making the impact. It's all kept secret beforehand so that protesters can't come. And so the campaign launch as a performance has gone. Yesterday's speech from Peter Dutton could very well have just been a normal speech delivered at any stage, apart from its length. But I think that one interesting thing about the campaign launch yesterday was that, yes, Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese in Western Australia matched each other on housing policies. They're going huge, $20 billion in housing policies directed at young people, first home buyers in particular, and called cost of living relief. So they're both going hell for leather on that point. But at the Liverpool Catholic Club, downstairs, while upstairs there were a couple of hundred people and all the focus was on Peter Dutton, downstairs there were hundreds of people and a lot more balloons for birthday parties at the Liverpool Catholic Club as people went there for their Sunday afternoon lunch, and you got no idea that there was a launch upstairs that they could be interested about or that they took any interest in. I think that in a way it demonstrated that people have not yet connected to this election campaign, which has been running since at least January 1 and probably since December. I think the political groups, people like me, have been watching this for months, but the public hasn't yet connected completely with the idea that there is a very important election campaign underway.
Couldn't agree more, Dennis. I asked a lot of people, and I was in the marginal seat of Corangamite on the weekend. I asked a lot of people out and about, did they even know there was an election on? Did they know the date of the election? And I reckon a good 70% of them said, yeah, I reckon it's coming up, isn't it? And I said, well, it's on now. And very few could even name the date. So you're absolutely right about the soft vote. What did you make of things, Chris? I particularly mentioned that pretty cringeworthy exchange between Albanese and Tanya Plibersek, and the fact that over at the Liberal Party event, Dennis talks about former Prime Ministers. Well, Malcolm Turnbull, clearly he put his invitation in the bin.
Yeah, look, I don't think anyone would be surprised about the feeling between Tanya Plibersek and Anthony Albanese. They've been long-term rivals. I think that Tanya Plibersek thinks that she should have Anthony Albanese's job, and he doesn't hold her in terribly high regard. I don't think there are any secrets about that. And Malcolm Turnbull, well, he's been campaigning against the Liberal Party for the last 2 elections, so why would he turn up and support it in any way, shape or form? It's interesting too, looking at the policies, we seem to have some demand-side fixes for supply-side problems when it comes to housing that could well and truly force up the cost of housing no matter who gets into government. Look, I wish that someone like Kevin Rudd back in 2007 would yell out, this reckless spending must stop. And that was at a time when we actually had money to spend. We had no net debt and we were having budget surpluses. We're heading towards $1 trillion worth of debt now, and no one seems to be concerned about that. particularly, I have to say, not the public. It seems to be now that it is all about what you can be bought for in an election campaign. Well, I think times are difficult, and eventually reality is going to be forced on both of these major parties. Things will have to change in government.
Dennis, give us your take on Newspoll today. There's a bit more of a climb there for Labor. It'll put some wind in their sails. Give us your sense of things.
Well, look, I think that the real point about the Newspoll today, when you look at it, everyone except One Nation is basically where they were at the last election. There's been a decline over the last few months in the coalition primary vote, but they're back to where they were at the last election. None of that decline has gone to the Labor Party primary vote. The two-party preferred remains the same as it was last week. So what we've actually got here is a shift within the Conservative vote away from the coalition but towards the minor Conservative party of One Nation. Now, a lot of that could well be coalition voters who were with the coalition have gone back to One Nation, but it could also be Labor voters who are giving their support to One Nation. The One Nation vote is not as good for the coalition as the Green vote is for Labor. The Green vote is where it was at the last election, and that can give preferences to Labor of about 80%. The coalition can only really rely on 50-50 preferences from One Nation. So what we're seeing is, I think, a demonstration in the national polls that, yes, the coalition has lost some support. Labor hasn't built any. What we've seen is a much greater chance of minority government. But we've also got the idea, I think, that there's a great deal happening in individual electorates. Look at where the leaders are going. They're not running national campaigns. They are going to particular seats where they are either sandbagging their own seats, defending seats, which wouldn't be at risk at that two-party preferred vote, and yet that's what they're doing. Both sides are doing it, and I think that what we're seeing, as Jim Chalmers said today, that this is going to get tighter, and I think it's going to be closer than the national poll suggests.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there is an absolute ground game. There's been a return to local politics in the last two elections in particular in a way we haven't seen. The national campaign, obsessives like us will draw sort of things from it, but I think the cut through with the soft vote is happening literally street by street, Bunnings by Bunnings. Just on that point, the local game, social media, Chris Uhlmann, a lot of the things that we haven't really, I guess, analysed because they're new features of campaigning. Really interesting about paid comment from these influencers on social media, basically cash for comment, I would call it. But it was raised with Monique Ryan, a key independent, a key teal, but apparently she's got no opinion about this. Have a listen.
Should it be clear to voters, people who are looking at this content, that it's paid for by the politician?
Look, I don't really have an opinion on it.
Really? You don't think voters deserve to know that if someone they're watching is saying great things about a politician, whether they're being paid by that politician?
Look, I'd have to give it some thought. It's not something I've given great thought to myself.
You'd have to give that some thought.
Well, I would think that it would be clear. I don't know. I think I'd have to give it some thought, David.
You're kidding me, Chris. You're kidding me.
Yeah, Peter, well, paid endorsement is an ad, right? And if it was an ad, then it would come under our electoral system and it would need to be declared at some stage. And I just invite people to do this with these kinds of things too. Imagine that Peter Dutton had been asked the same question and had had the same result. What do you think the Teals and the Greens and the Labor Party would be saying today? Would they have any doubt at all about where this stood? No, of course they wouldn't. It's not something you have to think about very long.
Just quickly, I'm going to go on and speak to Michael Shoebridge about this, but huge news over the weekend in relation to China and steel making in Britain. Chris, I know you've looked at this really closely.
Yeah, well, this is extraordinary. What we're seeing is the British government is taking over control of British Steel at a factory, the last Virgin Steelworks in Scunthorpe in the northern part of the UK, because they are frightened that the Chinese company that owns it might be in the process of sabotaging it and letting the furnaces go cold, which would mean it would be very difficult and would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to restart. Now they're accusing the Chinese essentially of sabotage. Well, I can tell you who started the sabotage of this, and it wasn't the Chinese government, it was the British government under both the Conservatives and the Labor Party who decided to stop using coal in the UK. What we've seen since then is that electricity prices have gone up to 124% of what they were just 5 years ago. Electricity prices in the UK are 4 times as high as they are in the United States. And now we might see the extraordinary sight of a Royal Navy vessel escorting a coking coal shipload into port in the UK. Get this, they need their coal, but they have to import it and they're going to escort it with the Royal Navy. You could not make this up. This is Shakespearean, but I don't know whether it's a tragedy or a farce, Peter.
Jens, I'll leave it there. Thank you.